In some ways, when I think about it now, I talk about how when I started writing, I wrote about white people. But actually, I was copying Enid Blyton. That's what it was. I mean, honestly, that's what it was. And I was so fascinated by the worlds that she created. And in the way that literature can create longing, I longed for, going exploring in dungeons that were dark, the famous five. And, I wanted to have George's dog, Timmy. And I wanted cucumber sandwiches, and they were always having picnics. And I just thought, I just want this life. And then there were the other books, but the Famous Five series were my favorite. But I remember I would go to the children's library in Osaka, where I grew up, and we were so fortunate to have this just very wonderful children's library. And I was just always looking for Blyton and the way that it was written in most of her books, the curve of the Y in her name. And once I saw that, that's what I wanted. That's what I took. I was an Enid Blyton copycat.
Did you think about ever that there were no adults in her books?
It's so interesting. I didn't. And maybe that was the appeal. It was that these children could, but the few adults were sort of very much on the sidelines. So they existed to pack the picnics, the lunches that they would take to go off somewhere. And I think that was maybe the appeal, because I remember in one of the Famous Five books, I think they discover a smuggling ring, I think. And I think it's just the sheer nerve of it that I must have responded to.
I mean, later on, she has become a problematic figure in literature. I mean, even the notion of her being a writer of literature, not just sort of churning out books. I think she wrote like 600 books.
I hear she wrote quite a few. But I would disagree. I think that she wrote literature. I think, I first of all have a problem with the distinctions we make that I think are really about, I think it's a kind of snobbery. I think books are either well written or not. And I think it says something that I am 44 years old and I remember the Enid Blyton books I read. And they shaped my world. And they made me write books about white people when I was 10 years old. I think that is what literature does. It informs you and shapes you. And I've read that she's, even that word problematic, I find myself having trouble with now because, half the time I'm thinking, what does it mean? And how is she? So I think that she's supposed to have been racist in some way. And of course, it's entirely possible when you're a child and you're reading things and you don't get them. I mean, my dear friend Binyavanga Wainaina used to talk about how when he read books in Kenya about Africans written by white people, he always cited the white characters because all of the Africans were just really dumb. And he would talk about how he had no idea what he was doing, but in the books, white characters good, African characters bad. So of course you identify with the white characters. And I guess this is just a way of saying that I really don't remember anything in the Famous Five in particular that was offensive, even remotely. But and I think I don't know. I think she's supposed to have been right wing in her politics. I think.
I don't know if she had politics.
Yeah, but and there's a part of me that I don't know. Is it possible to say that doesn't matter to me? What matters to me is that her books gave me joy, and really taught me the power of stories. Because if reading those books could make me invent a world that I did not know, I think that is something. And also, in some ways, I'm grateful that I had that, because when I then kind of came into my own, which is when I started writing the stories that were true to me, I feel as though having had that beginning was useful, because then, in some ways, my own stories then felt even more, I don't know, it was this, the discovery was greater and richer and more meaningful.
Which character were you of the five?
George, I think. Because George was a girl who was not girly. She was a tomboy girl, and so did the things the girls weren't supposed to do. And of course, I identified with that very much.
I read that was a sexist part of her writing, that the notion of having short hair made you a boy, when they were trying to correct her, because this has happened. You know, they've been reissuing her books and trying to change words and change the notion of hair.
That.
Oh yes.
But George is not I don't understand. I mean, the whole idea is, I actually would argue that there's something quite progressive about the character of George, which is it widens the idea of what it means to be a girl. But yeah, I mean, but also there's something, I really feel uncomfortable with trying to force the past to fit certain shapes that we've crafted today. I really prefer to look at things in their context, and this makes me think about Chinua Achebe being criticized for criticizing Conrad for Heart of Darkness. And the criticism was, Mr. Achebe, you shouldn't criticize Conrad because everybody in his time thought that way about Africans. And Achebe's response was actually no. So he brought examples of people at that time who did not think of Africans as sort of slightly less human. And so that's what I mean. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't correct the books if I were reissuing them. So we now live in this generation where we have to always have trigger alerts. So maybe you could just say, watch out, there's a character called George who might. But to change, I just, and as a writer, I find that deeply offensive. I would hate to think that whatever I create would be changed when I'm gone because somehow it doesn't fit some sort of taste or way of seeing things.
Well, this anecdote that I wanted to tell you about Enid Blyton, who is now being corrected, is that she was an avid tennis player, and she liked to play in the nude.
What? I don't know what I thought I was going to hear, but it wasn't that. What? This woman gets more and more interesting. What? Wait, like outside? All right, I have to go read a biography of her now. I mean, what? Well, she must not have had breasts because it's actually quite difficult to run around. Yeah, I mean the things just I would know, but. And would she then insist that the partner also be nude?
It wasn't that detailed. It was just for me this woman of this time, and then maybe it was part of a vitalist movement. I don't know what it was. I guess it wasn't. It wasn't Centre Court Wimbledon, but it was just. I just thought.
I am so going to use this. It's too good. What? This is it's not. I did not expect that. No, I'm going to find a biography of hers now.
How do you choose your writers?
By just reading lots of things and figuring out what I love and what speaks to me and what I think I learn from. So yes, I know about what I'm reading. Deborah Levy. She's so insightful and so kind of pure about a certain kind. What is it? A woman's life and her thinking and her complexities. And I really feel. I read her and I think I get her and I think she would get me. But I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't know how I choose. There are certain books I read about, and I know I just probably won't pick them up. Often when they're kind of speculative and that sort of thing, it doesn't work for me, so I just won't bother. But most of the time I read about a book or hear about a book, and I will try. I'll just go see if it works for me,
But isn't there also a canon that comes out of people that you... I mean, if Deborah Levy would say, I'm reading this...
Yeah, I would certainly go check it out. Except... No, because it's not... No, if she said, I'm reading this, and it's about this alternative universe, and people have become donkeys with... I just won't. So no, it would have to kind of sound ever so slightly my kind of thing. But also nonfiction. I mean, I think nonfiction, maybe I'm a lot more... I'll read almost anything. Because I'm just always kind of wanting to. So I'm reading this book called... because I read a number of books at the same time, which is terrible, but... about, is it Dead Money? So it's about how the ultra-wealthy hide their money. And it's just, I find it really interesting.
Where do they hide them?
Oh, so whether those little islands like Jersey, and then also Switzerland is still quite a thing, and Monaco. But also really interesting is that they have property in places like the UK, but those things that they own are registered in like Mauritius. So that way you kind of circumvent things, and it's all just really dark. One of the things I'm learning to kind of maybe be a bit more thoughtful about is that there's the psychology of money, I think. So I'm thinking about those people like, you're crazy. I mean, wow, why? But I'm thinking, if I had that much money, it must make you a bit mad. So I think that there's a psychology. So I think of myself, for example, and when I had absolutely no money, and I would hear about people buying shoes for $200, and I would think, you are mad, right? And now here I am. I think that there's a psychology that comes with it. And sometimes when people have a lot of money, psychologically, they haven't quite made peace with having that much money, so they don't spend or give as much. And I think people can be very judgmental of them, but then you don't know what the backstory is. I think especially people who've come from absolute nothing and they make a lot of money, and someone says, well, you should give your money away. And I'm thinking, they don't think, somewhere in their psyche, they still think that they're that, utterly poor person.
It's very uplifting and interesting for me to hear you talk with nuance, even about rich people. Can you say something about tolerance? How do you nurture tolerance, and how do you have it, so to speak? I mean, where do you get it from?
I don't know, but I it's so funny. But rich people are human, aren't they? I mean, I've always worried about this idea that I don't know, maybe because I'm a storyteller and I'm really interested in human beings, and I think, and I think about people, and I'm thinking about their backstory and where they come from, and I don't know, I don't even know if tolerance is the word. I think I'm just and by the way, I should say that people I feel very strongly about in both directions, people I detest. My family tells me that I am so passionate in everything. My husband tells me, you love passionately and you hate passionately. And I think he's right. So I don't think I'm just wonderfully nuanced about everything, but no, when rich people, and also what I consider the easy targets of kind of contemporary discourse. So I have a friend who thinks that everybody who works in investment banking is evil. And she says this so casually. And I have a friend who works in investment banking. And this guy has the soul of a poet. He's in investment banking because he did well in school and because he supports his family, supports his extended family in Nigeria. And so it's hard for me, so it's that kind of thing. You think about it and you think, well, actually, not quite. It's not that simple. It's not that straightforward.
It's your curiosity.
Yes, I'm very curious. Very.
Since forever?
Yes, I was the child who didn't mind her business, absolutely. And the thing is, when you're a child, it's not considered a good thing. You're told, well, at least in where I grew up, you're told to mind your business. You're told to don't listen in when adults are talking. don't poke around things. I was always interested in just knowing. Adults were talking, I would sit there and listen. I'd go to my father's study and look at his papers.
With his consent?
No.
No.
When he wasn't there. I mean, it... So I would look at the papers he was marking, students' papers, that sort of thing. No, of course I didn't ask him, Daddy, can I go look at your papers in the study? He'd be like, you have no business in my study. So I would just go. I like to think he was harmless. I like to think he was a young writer collecting material.
Has your curiosity gotten you into trouble?
I guess so. I think my tendency to ask questions, and often in a way that's quite direct, has sometimes come across to some people as, too much or offensive. And obviously I don't mean it to be, and I didn't see it for a long time, but I see it now. But
Can curiosity lead you in wrong directions in the literary sense? I mean, can it be a dead end for a novel, or is curiosity your sort of gasoline to write?
Oh, it is, absolutely. I don't know, how could it lead you to a dead end?
I don't know. I mean, maybe because if you ask so many questions, you can lose yourself in the story. I don't know. Researching, for instance, if you do research for a novel, I guess you did a lot of research for Half of a Yellow Sun, that you might end up having so much material that the plot got lost.
Actually, that's true, and I think that's actually a very good point, and I think it's true for me, especially in the context of doing research. And with Half of a Yellow Sun, it was almost overwhelming. I had so much material, so there's so much I did not use. And after that, anytime I think about doing research, I really tell myself I must hold back. Like I don't need to know everything before I start writing. But still it's hard to, because I'm thinking, okay, but let's find out what that was about. And you can't use everything. So in some ways, that's actually, I'm not going to say bad for creativity, but it can have negative, possibly negative consequences. So in some ways, it's part of the reason that there's a subject which I will not name, historical, that I'm really interested in. And I want to write fiction about, but I'm terrified that when I start the research, it will take me 20 years. So I'm kind of holding back.
I know, it's also maybe with age, you become, I think there are two paths. Either you become more confident and think I don't need all the research because the story is the important part, that I'm able to somehow sum up what I know and what I think I know, and that's the story. And then I could never write this because I know too little.
Yeah, but I don't know that if you want to write, as I do, the kind of sort of historically situated fiction, I just think you need research. I've never, and maybe I'm quite old-fashioned in this view, that you just feel like you really need to do the work. I mean, when people say, oh, I wrote a novel about the Second World War and I didn't research it because the story was in my head, I'm thinking, no, you bloody need to know the details of how people's lives were changed when, I don't know, if they were in Dresden and when it was burning. You need to know the details of, what was the ash like in the air, that kind of thing. So I'm not so sure that it's about confidence as much as it is about what you think is important and how you think one should go about writing a certain kind of fiction. I think with age I have become certainly more confident, and I think particularly because there's a sense in which I'm more confident as a woman, because I think it's quite different from men. I don't really care, in a way that when I was younger I cared, even if I pretended I didn't care. But now I think the other thing that has done it for me is grief. Losing the people who were your life's anchors, it just completely changes so much and reorients so much, and so now life is short.
Do you remember the final sentence in Gone with the Wind when is it Scarlett who says, "What about me? What about the estate?" And he says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't care."
I think that's a great line. That's kind of where I am now. Or rather, I will choose what I care about.
You've become more tough. It's hard for me to imagine that you've ever been really insecure.
Not really insecure. But you know what's interesting about... I didn't know I was confident until I was told that I was confident, you know? And it's actually when I left Nigeria, and so I think I'm kind of normal in Nigeria, I think. And so often in the US, people would say, "Where do you get this confidence from?" And so at some point I thought, oh, they're all saying I'm confident, so I am. But I think when I was younger, I think this is true really for most people. You kind of, even the posture of not caring is in itself a kind of caring, you know. And I think I did that, and something's really changed. Changed in, I'm going to say, the past. I think motherhood changed a lot. My daughter is 6, and I don't care. Or rather, I will choose what I care about, and only I get to decide that. But you're right. I mean, I never. When I was a child, I was kind of, I was a popular girl. I had friends. My insecurities were, if anything, I think were maybe more creative than not, so that I felt that my little books were maybe not as good as they should be. The little books I handwrote in exercise books, and I illustrated the covers myself, gave them to my mother.
Well, what were your first books about? Except, they were white people, but what kind of stories were they?
Enid Blyton stories. One was Down Mackintosh Lane, and one had a circus.
Like Enid Blyton?
Mm-hmm, of course. And then I think there was a character called Anne, and they had picnics. Seriously, I just copied the woman.
So when do you know that you are? You were supposed to study medicine, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't want to, and you left. And you've been writing always. When does your own? How do you know that now you are leaving Enid Blyton and going towards Chimamanda?
I don't know how. I obviously it didn't happen overnight, but I really think that it was reading more widely and reading African writers. And so I have specific sort of touchstones. I know that The African Child, Kamaralaye's book, was really important to me because I remember how I reacted to it. I remember how I fell in love, and it was magical. And then, of course, Chinua Achebe later. And then there's a series called The African Writers. Not The African Writers, Peace Setters. The African Writers came later. Peace Setters were sort of young adult books. And they were set in different parts of Africa. So there was one set in the Zimbabwe, in Ghana, in Gabon, and Liberia. And so I was learning about my continent through these books. And they were kind of, some were very well written, others were not. And they were so it was from romance to thrillers to all kinds of things. I really wish somebody would bring them back for young people. But I think those showed me that I could write about my world and that it could be interesting, and so that started happening. And of course, when it started happening, it was so much more seamless, and I didn't have to. The early books were real, but real in a way that was unreal, because I was copying this woman, and I had never been to England. And when that changed, I don't know that it changed. I don't know when, but at some point, maybe when I was maybe 13, I would say, about that. 14 maybe.
So when you got your own voice, has it then been uncomplicated to read all kinds of literature? You say that when you started getting the notion of African literature, it changed for you because it allowed you to write from your own world. But then was there a third kind of, there was Enid Blyton, there was the young adult fiction from your own continent, and then...
Oh, and then everything. I read the Russians, and my father we didn't have too many novels at home. We had a lot of mathematical and statistical books. But my father did have a series of sort of hardbound books, like Black Beauty, I read that. Water Babies, I read that. So it was sort of this, and so I read all of them. So I read everything. I really read everything. And then my father, because he was such a keen Catholic, had books about the Catholic Church. I read them all. So I think that's where my father, I know a lot about Catholic history. I mean, some of which I've forgotten, but as a child I would rattle things off about the popes and about synods, and I knew,
What was the attraction?
Well, the books were there, and my family was Catholic, and I think there's a part of me that also is drawn to a kind of drama, and I mean, if you want drama, you just need to go to a Catholic service. And so I think all of those things came together, and I think also just being a questioning child, faith interested me, still interests me actually. But I read those books because they were there. And because I read so much, and often, I'd read a book, I'd get a book from the library and read it, and then there's nothing else to read. So I would sort of go look at my father's books, and because they were so limited in their range, I started reading about the popes.
Actually, Enid Blyton wrote about the Old and the New Testament. I don't know, I think she made stories out of the stories.
Really?
Yeah, you have.
Huh.
Crossing interests, except for the nude tennis.
I think that I might take up nude tennis. I think I'm just so inspired. Never mind that I cannot, in fact, play tennis, but, one can learn.
You're only 44.
Exactly.
When you say you are interested in faith, is that in a theoretical way or
both, I think. Yeah, both. Yes. So I'm interested in the reasoning, if that makes sense. So, and there's a sense in which a lot of Catholicism is about accept what you're told. And I want to understand why, I feel as though my father didn't always want me to ask too many questions. Because in some ways, when you start to ask too many questions, the holes start to appear, right? And actually, in the later years of my father's life, I stopped talking about these things with him because I felt that I wanted to respect his faith. And I just didn't want to create unnecessary discomfort for him. So if, for example, he was going to Mass because it was the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and he would say, oh, we're going to Mass, today is the Holy Day of Assumption, and in my mind I would think, yeah, but that actually was just made up by a pope, just, fairly recently. But I wouldn't say it in the way that I would have when I was younger. Because, you think there's no point. Yeah. There's no point causing.
Maybe asking questions, is that a kind of an opposition to faith? I mean, if you either you have it or you don't.
See, I don't agree with that. I think that faith and reason can coexist, because otherwise, it feels to me almost manipulative, and also almost magical. So if we say you either have it or you don't, I mean, how does it fall from the sky? I mean, and if that's the case, then if some people somehow get it falling from the sky and some don't, then why do we judge those who didn't get it? Like, it's not their fault. And it's not something I accept. I think one can talk oneself through the idea of believing. I'm interested in that. I mean, haven't done it successfully, but...
No, because I would be interested in what that kind of talk could sound like, because it's, I think some people really feel at home in the church, be it Catholic or whichever, and some people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I know. But I think for me the point is to say that faith is something one has or doesn't, and one shouldn't question, I find it unacceptable. And so I think if there is any tradition I admire in the Catholic Church, it's the Jesuit tradition, because there's this sense of just a kind of intellectual inquiry, which somehow they happen to have in addition to believing. And I find that attractive.
I know also it's been a place where women could actually, on phone, when they went to the cloisters, they could read and marry Jesus and get rid of the other kind of men.
Which is very interesting, isn't it? Because, you think about it and you think to find a certain kind of freedom, women needed to lose a certain kind of freedom. And it's there's a part of me that's just deeply opposed to the idea, theoretically, the idea of a cloister. But on the other hand, reading about just the details and the complexities, I also see how it has its advantages. It's like a friend of mine who chooses to cover herself. She's Muslim. And she said something to me once that I found she said, I feel very free. Right? And she's like, I'm no longer this object on the street. I feel so free. And I had never thought about it like that, because for so long, to me, I just would think, what? Why? What's this whole point of sort of, because the whole idea of covering in some ways is to sexualize a woman, really, because if you weren't looked at as an object of sex, there would be no need to cover. But then to have this friend of mine, and who made the choice, because I think there's always a difference, right? And to say she's Sudanese, and to say that she feels so free, and I thought, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way ever.
It's interesting the way we look at each other and imagine each other, and I would say that in a cloister, the literature you have at hand is rather good. I mean, it's the Bible, it's the mother of all stories, isn't it?
Indeed. That's actually very funny. The literature you have at hand is rather good. It is. You're also having to wake up, at 5 a.m. and say all the decades of the rosary and, bow and scrape to the Mother Superior. No, I shouldn't. They're actually all... And also there are, in fact, religious orders that do such incredible work, out in the world, not the cloistered nuns. And, and that too I find it really inspiring, the idea that because you're moved by faith, you dedicate your life to something, I don't know, it must have a, I couldn't do that.
But you do, Chimamanda. You've dedicated your life and have faith in literature.
Yes, but it's not as noble as sort of, I don't know, working with disabled children in some forgotten part of the world,
But maybe it is as important. I mean...
Actually, yeah, I agree. Yes, I'm just realizing that this is the argument I usually make. So when people say, "Why? What's the point of literature and stories?" and I really do believe you're right, absolutely. But sometimes, sometimes one cannot help but think, "My God, these people are so good, and if only I could be half as good."